2 of professional writing skills focuses on the sentence level challenges that many business writers struggle with. So in this section, we're going to review active language, specific language, and plain English. We have a section here on eliminating clutter in your writing, considering sentence structure, punctuation, and grammar, and editing and proofreading strategies that will help you polish and perfect everything that you write. So let's start with concise language, which is lesson 3. So we like to suggest that you eliminate repetition. Use only one word for a one-word idea. At a time prior to can become before. All right. So some other examples might be, we are in agreement with you about the contract terms. Instead, we agree with you about the contract terms. Or she solved the problem in a clever way because she solved the problem cleverly, or she cleverly solved the problem. So we want to avoid repetition in everything we write. And so sometimes we get the question, well, why are we struggling? Why are we spending time on these, getting rid of one word in a document? Why does it even matter? So in today's business climate, people are looking for the most succinct messages. And so we're going to use every strategy, every tool in our toolbox to take those 3-page documents and make them less than 1-page documents. 1 page is, for the most part, the length that most documents should be in today's business environment. So we're going to use every strategy that we have at our disposal. We talked earlier about using a planning process to determine what our reader really needs, and then eliminating the facts and ideas that they don't need or won't care about. We talked about being clear about their purpose for writing and including the most important message at the beginning. We talked about creating a rational flow or organizational scheme for our messages, and now we're on the sentence level. And we're talking about making sure that every word in every document, whether it's email, reports, proposals, presentations, has a purpose for being there. So we're going to eliminate any of the repetition that we see. Okay, so some of these may look familiar to you. I see them all the time when we analyze writing. Alternative choices, right? Why is that repetitive? Because an alternative is a choice. Basic fundamentals, fundamental and basic say the same thing. A crisis in its very nature is serious, and also an outcome is already final, and so on and so forth. You can spend some more time on this list, and it's also printed in our downloadable copy of Professional Writing Skills, also in the Write It Well Academy. So you can spend more time and do some more exercises getting rid of the repetition in your writing. In fact, it's a great idea to pause or take a moment to look at any writing that you send out and see if you can find examples of repetition there. So another thing we want to do is to avoid wasteful clauses and there is phrases. So oftentimes we say, our suggestion is, instead use the word and let it do the work for you. So, and again, an example, their assumption is that the company should always come first. Instead, allow those words, the verbs, to do the hard work. So they assume the company should always come first. So we call these verbs that are frozen, their assumption is. Eliminate those wasteful possessives. Instead, they assume the company should always come first. Some more examples. The broker who works in Chicago sent out the incomplete file to the home office. Revision might look like the Chicago broker sent the incomplete file to the home office. Look for any words that you can eliminate in your sentences to tighten up the language challenges. Especially for those of you that are already sophisticated writers, look for any unnecessary words in your writing. Okay? Again, there is a new package on your desk. Instead, a new package is on your desk. There may be several applicants who have the necessary background for this position. Several applicants may have the necessary background for this position. Okay, so make sure you're going through your writing and eliminating any repetition or wasteful clauses. Okay, so now we're going to jump into my favorite section, which is embracing lists as a tool to communicate succinctly and concisely. So when we talked about getting that 5-page document down to 1 or the 3-page document down to 1, we're also going to use lists as a tool for doing just that. Now, there are some circumstances where you won't want to use a list. I just came across a document that we're helping write for a major Fortune 500 company, and they need to follow a specific template. And in each of the templated sections, there needs to be three sentences of narrative. So there's no opportunity there to use a list. But in every other writing circumstance I can think of, you can always substitute a list for any narrative form of writing. In fact, your reader will appreciate it. So I'm sure many of you already use lists, and so my suggestion is use more lists. And if you don't already use lists, you can follow these guidelines to use lists. Again, if you're a list user, just make sure that the lists that you're using follow these basic guidelines. Okay, the first guideline in our list is to make sure your list always has an introduction, because it's very difficult to read a list without an introduction. So this one at the beginning, the first example, doesn't have an introduction, so it's impossible to understand what the list is for. We do see this, and instead write a quick introduction. To express our appreciation for your business, we would like to offer you one of these several thank you gifts. So great, you've got your reader's attention with that introduction. Then make sure all the items belong on the lists. This is something that we see with even more frequency, where not all items relate to the introductory statement. Here, the last one, the introduction says, to prepare the room for training, please do the following. But the last item doesn't fit. Design the training. So that doesn't fit because the other issues were about preparing the room, not designing the training. So when you want to make sure that all items relate to the introductory statement. When the training room is over, please do these 4 things. We talk a lot about analytical skills and how you can show your analytical skills in writing. One of the ways to do that is to count, to show that you've actually counted the items. So when I'm writing to somebody, I might say, I'm going to follow up with these 4 steps. So this writer has said, when the training is over, please do these 4 things. That is an actual example of analytical skills. Then you've listed the 4 things, okay? Notice, if you will, that all 4 of our items there start with a verb. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in a minute, but guideline number 3 is to be consistent with capitalization, fragments, and end punctuation. Okay, so here's an example where it's inconsistent. We're unable to meet the original deadline for the following reasons, okay? 2 team members resigned in October. Then notice how there's a period or an end stop and then a new sentence there. Then notice how the second bullet point doesn't have any punctuation, and neither does the third. So the rule here, the guideline, is that we must be consistent with 3 elements in our list. The first is capitalization. All your bulleted items should start with capital letters. See how sloppy this one looks and how much better it will look when we include capital letters to start each of our bullet points. The second rule here is around fragments and end punctuation. If one of your items, in this case the first one, includes punctuation, this one does because it has more than one complete sentence, all of your bulleted items must include end punctuation. Okay, so you must punctuate all your bullet points if one of them has punctuation, end punctuation. But the inverse is also true. They can all be fragments. The rule goes back to consistency, which is one of the most important rules around communication and around grammar. Just remember to be consistent. You're showing your reader a roadmap, and you're showing them the rules for how to drive in your imaginary world. So you can't change the rules in the middle. You must be consistent, and you're showing them how to communicate with them. It's your map. So we've tightened this one up. Look at how much more professional it looks with beginning capitalization and consistent punctuation. In this case, we have no end punctuation. I prefer that myself. I think that no end punctuation is necessary unless, of course, you have one bullet point that already has end punctuation. So I vote for all fragments. It can be a complete sentence, but just not have a period, and that counts as a fragment, okay? So the fourth rule, again, maybe one of my favorites here, is around parallel structure. And this is useful because parallel structure applies to both lists and anything that you write in narrative form. Okay, so here we have an example where it's not parallel. Okay, so we have not started our list in parallel form. And the second example here, we are in parallel form. We've started with verbs, and in fact, they are the same verb tense. So again, we're training our reader how to read our list. You're starting them all, the bullet points, with a capital letter, with a verb if possible, or a noun is fine, but whatever you choose, be consistent about it. And the last guideline here is to make sure you've organized your list. We like to say that a list should have between 5 and 7 items on it. If it has more than 5 or 7, what does your reader do? They take pause and they might think this list looks really long or difficult. I'll come back to it. Now, will they is the question. So instead of creating that possibility that they'll leave your information and not return to it, take your first opportunity and maximize it. So make sure that that list is easy to work with. So if you have 10 items on a list, what are you going to do? You're going to go back and organize the list into smaller sub-lists. So maybe this one is 3 different lists instead of 1 list. Okay, and that's what we've chosen here. We've chosen to create 3 different lists, and we've organized them in a logical way. Your reader is going to appreciate that. They're going to see you as somebody that they want to work with and want to communicate with. So as we can see on this slide, we've taken that longer list and broken it down into 3 lists. Your reader will appreciate the fact that you took the time to organize that longer list into 3 lists that are easier to follow. Again, this is how we increase our results, is by making our writing easier to read and act on. Okay? So you're going to make a decision at some point about whether you're going to use bulleted lists or numbered lists. Do you know the difference between bulleted lists and numbered lists? In general, a numbered list implies either a priority, so a process that needs to be followed in sequence, or priority of items. So one of those 2 things. A numbered list implies either priority or sequence, whereas a bulleted list says that all these items are equal in weight. Okay, so make a decision about whether you use bulleted or numbered lists based on your purpose for putting them together.